throughout my career journey, and this could be very ingrained in our Asian culture, right? You only say yes, and you say yes to everything. But I realized that is not sustainable.
Did you know that 1 in 3 Singaporeans work at least 10 hours a day? I'm definitely guilty of that. If you spend most of your waking hours working, I invite you to reflect on this question. Who are you beyond the work that you do? Hello, I'm Cheryl, your co-host for today, and you're listening to the Handful of Leaves podcast. Handful of Leaves is a boutique Buddhist publication featuring stories by Asian writers on everyday topics such as relationships, mental health, work, finance, and the long list goes on. Life is already hard as it is, so we hope you can take away some insights that will help you navigate the complexities of life and lead happier and more fulfilling lives. Today we have a very special guest on board, Sister Amy, and my co-host Kai Sing. In the episode today, we discuss how can we humanize corporate life, when to quit and when to stay, as well as exploring the 3P plus P framework to achieve corporate success. There are many, many more gems in this episode, so stay tuned till the end, where Sister Amy will share how a simple accounting concept can transform your happiness. Enjoy!
So maybe we can introduce our guest for today, Sister Amy, with quite a tricky starter question, which is, could you introduce yourself? Who are you beyond your titles, your achievements, and your responsibilities?
So I often introduce myself as a joy lamp. So I always believe about having the joy from our hearts and sharing it with others. So that has always been a motto that I've been carrying around and also empowers me in doing what I do.
Oh, I really like that. So it's like Amy the joy lamp.
Yes, not the Aladdin lamp, just in case you'll come to me for 3 wishes.
Why do you call yourself a joy lamp? How did this term come about?
So it actually came about in one of my coaching sessions. So I had a coach at work, and she asked a very similar question to what Cheryl just did. And at that point in time, the word joy just naturally came upon me. But I realized that just joy for myself is not, meaningful enough. So that's where I coupled it with joy lamp, so that there's something that I can bring around, not just to shine upon myself, but also to others.
What do you mean, like, joy is not meaningful on its own?
So for myself, I think if I'm just happy on my own, but I can't be of value to people around me, I think that may not be as meaningful. So hence why I wanted to share it.
So I see you doing a lot of volunteer work, and you're probably an overachiever, high flyer in your organization as well. And you also do mentoring. How do you achieve so much? Was it because you want to spread joy, or is there something else?
When you mentioned the word overachiever, that was something that I think since I was young, even before coming to the corporate world or being introduced to voluntary work, I tend to have this expectation on myself that I always need to do my very best. Now that I think about it, it's a bit silly. So like back in school, I felt like I had the responsibility that whenever I go for an examinations that I have to score first. Otherwise, I'm a disappointment. I have no idea where that came from, because to be fair, my parents didn't impose that on me. So that seems to be something that I self-imposed upon myself. And as I grew up, I start to realize that that expectation is not very sustainable. And that's where I start to find ways to what other ways can I, do my very best, besides just, trying to accumulate medals and put on badges and things like that. So that's when I start to get involved in volunteering. And volunteering was also my balancing factor. That actually is balancing me out from what I do at work or what do I need to achieve in the corporate side of things. That is the typical KPI of, okay, how much revenue you're going to grow this year, how much cost you're going to cut this year, etc., which are very binary and objective. So that sometimes you may seem as, overachieving, because every year it's like, the extra 10% or that extra 15%. A lot of people had this misconception, or maybe some people even use it as their mantra to say that, for me to be successful in the corporate world, I need to always be at the first place. I need to be the one that is driving and leading. It's a lot about the me, myself, and I. While I can accumulate the joy myself, it is not something that I define as meaningful if I could not share it out. So the volunteering part actually allows me to okay, since I managed to be meaningful in this space, can I actually bring other people along in the same spectrum, or try to, mentor others so that they don't fall into the same pothole. So that's my version of giving back. And by that, it actually balanced me out from being the overachiever that is only focusing and concentrating on myself. So that balancing made me feel a lot more human, to make sure that while we keep to some of the corporate achievements, that we don't lose connection with people, to not lose connection that ultimately we are all human, and also how we can help each other along the way. And I think that's the part that sharing with others actually taper down my overachiever mindset.
I'm curious because you mentioned about climbing the corporate ladder, and in your LinkedIn profile, I think Cheryl was the one who pointed out less than 2 years, you will get a promotion. So was that deliberate? And then who do you bring along, and how do you balance the tangibles and the intangibles, KPI and the human side of things?
I have to say I've been very, very fortunate to have managers that have believed in me. And I wouldn't necessarily say that, that was deliberate. I didn't say that, okay, I need to get to this level by within a year or within 2 years. A lot of it were having someone else who believed in me, giving me the opportunity and the platform. And there was a mentor that shared this with me, which I've used this now to guide other mentees along. Especially when everyone has their career aspirations to get to the next level. So he shared with me that there are 3 P's that, help you or guide you on your next corporate promotion. One is the platform. So your role needs to be operating at the next level. So for example, let's say you want to get from an analyst to associate, then the role that you're performing needs to be associate platform to allow you to showcase your potential. Secondly is obviously performance. So this is where, you really need to do what is required as a associate to demonstrate that you are worthy of that title. And last but not least actually is my favorite, which is P for people. So it's about how people actually know you, what people know you for, and how do you then get the power of your network to support you to the next journey. For once, he was one of the mentors that helped me demystify the whole corporate promotion piece and made it quite logical that, each of the components is something that, we can influence and work towards. To me, that was very enriching. And that has always been now the framework that I've used even for my mentees who want to get to the next level. And I've been quite happy to see that, with that framework in mind, a number of my mentees have actually got to the next level as well. So that's how I bring them along the journey.
Yeah, and I think we should never underestimate the power of the relationship currency, which is who you know and what do people think about. How do people perceive you in terms of your competence, your reputation? Because I think to a certain extent, your performance can only return you a limited amount of reward, but then it's the people that you know that helps you to get to the next level as well.
Totally. There's also a part where you mentioned it's not deliberate, but having that 3P in mind does sound quite deliberate. to me. I mean, because you have to make an active effort, right, to be in the right place and also connect with the right people and know what are the performance indicators to work on so that you're offering value and creating value in the organization. Then I think sometimes people might also feel, I'm not so sure as a Buddhist whether I should chong and strive so hard. Then you kind of just wait for things to happen. It's like, okay, by luck and by chance, which I personally don't believe that that's true. And then some people might also struggle with finding that sweet spot, right? Like, have you ever struggled knowing how much you should strive in an organization and how much to kind of say, okay, I think it's enough?
No, definitely. So I think at different juncture of my career, I would say, for example, at a much junior level, then it may seems a little bit more straightforward. But as you get to a much more senior position, then there's probably more complexity in applying the 3Ps. But what I really like was when I was at a mid-career, one of my promotion gift was this book. It's called What Got You Here Will Not Get You There. Again, while I emphasize on the framework as a guideline, at every part of the career journey, the framework also will, change slightly differently from a dynamic perspective. So that actually gives me a reminder to also manage my own expectations to say, oh, just because you use 3P, then cannot be every time you go to the next level is 2 years. Then that's a little bit, deluded in that way. So for me, I guess there is no right or wrong answer. And there are people who would want to chong. And in fact, there are people that have gotten promoted even faster than me. So again, it's all relative. And also there are some people who said that, hey, you know what, I don't feel like I want to go to the next level because I see the amount of stress that comes with it. And I'm actually very happy where I am. And I think as a society, we should also be not judgmental to those that say, hey, actually, I'm happy where I am. I don't have to, get to a senior level. I love what I do. And then I go home and I feel happy. And for those that who wants to strive for the ambition, again, we also shouldn't judge them to say that, wow, why they always so competitive, must always win, etc. So I guess everyone is different and depends on what you want to achieve, you put in that effort. And reason why I said I wasn't deliberate was because sometimes it also depends on the condition. So for example, there was one year I remember I was part of a talent program. And everyone had this mindset that, oh yeah, after this talent program, right, most of the people will be promoted. And the reality is that wasn't the case. So there are certain situations whereby even you have put in that effort, the conditions were just not right at that point in time. And on hindsight, I actually appreciated it because I was thinking if actually I was promoted at that point in time, which is earlier, I wouldn't actually be ready to take up bigger responsibilities. So sometimes going into the next level too quickly may not necessarily be a good thing as well. It's a lot about learning when is the right time, like you said, the sweet spot. But most of the time you can't get the answer before. It's always on hindsight. It's like, oh, actually it's okay lah. I think now I'm more ready.
And I guess like when you're experiencing it, you're probably feeling very like frustrated or like demotivated that you put in so much effort, but then you didn't get what you want. But then you see the values and the lessons of it, like when you look back many years later. I'm wondering, Kai-Ting, what are your thoughts with that question? Like, how much you should strive, like the question they asked to Sister Amy.
I was actually thinking of adding one more P to that framework, purpose, because I think we can meet right people, have the right platform, and do all these performance indicators, right? But for what? So I want to share a funny story. It's about cab driver. He told me the same exact thing as what Sister Amy just mentioned. It was, I think, 1 a.m. or something like that, and I was on my way back home from the office. And then he was like, oh, you work very high rank. Then he started telling me life lessons. Typically people who climb up the corporate ladder, they get paid a lot. It comes at a price lah. Because that's where, the stress comes in, and is it really worth it? And it got me thinking as well. So don't strive for the sake of striving or because everyone else around is doing the same. Knowing when to let go also. And I think to take care of our own mental well-being, that's very important. Typically, I would only realize at the tipping point like I'm burning out, then I was like, okay, I think I'm working too hard. I need to pull the brake. Again, always on hindsight. So I don't have the right answer, but I think it's through all these different experience that I learned how to recalibrate.
I did have one more P to add also. It will be pivot, which is basically having the courage to pivot your life direction. So for example, because I think for me, I'm just starting out in my career, and a lot of it I benchmark based on what other people are doing. Are they earning more? Okay, I follow. Like they work OT, I also follow. So a lot of times I get lost in the doing and the striving. I don't really know what's my purpose, and I don't know where I'm heading to 5 years later. Like I hope I won't be in a place where I completely hate my life and hate my job. So I think having that courage to pause and to really ask yourself what is important, what are your values, and then taking small steps to pivot towards the direction that you want, and then charge towards the better place lah, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's so important to know when to quit. Because in society, sometimes the word quitting, it's so tough. It's taboo. It's like you're giving up. But sometimes if you're giving up on the right thing, it's going to be so much better for your life.
I think that's why Cheryl chose a P instead of a Q. It's a better word than quit, but quite close. It has more positive connotation to it. What has worked out quite well for me, and would be my advice for those who have just started their career, is to really explore different roles. I say explore different roles. I didn't say jump different companies. Explore different roles and jump different companies are very different. And why did I say that? It's because at the beginning of my career, I had the opportunity to obviously be part of the graduate program who allows me to be mobile. So I changed department every 8 months. And I really enjoyed it because I get to see something new, I get to learn something new, and it didn't become dull or boring, which could also sometimes be a reason of why we lost motivation at work. And I continue on that trajectory, so which is why if you look at my career history, it's a little bit rojak lah. So I started out in finance, and then I did a little bit of strategy and change, and then I found love when I had the role to face a client, which is something I never imagined myself doing because I graduated with accountancy. So I thought, okay, for the rest of my life, I'll be dealing with numbers. And then I'm dealing with like an external client. And it kind of just hit a very sweet spot for me in terms of my personality. And I start to love what I did in that space. So I think it's important as we find motivation in work, and especially for those that have been in the same company. A lot of us would think like, oh, I think it's time to quit. Maybe I should join another company. I may be the wrong person to get advice because I've been with the same company for more than a decade. But what I did realize for people that keep jumping is they actually see the same problem every organization that they go. So I am a big advocate of internal mobility just because you kind of have a sweet spot of still have your network in the company to support you, but at the same time explore different roles within the organization, and then hopefully find one that really, really resonate with you and grow from there. And you will know it when you find it.
How do you know it when you find it? Can you describe that feeling?
So I think this is a little bit of an art than a science. Okay, why do I say that? So when I graduated with accountancy, I remember the advice that was given to me is, hey, Amy, so after graduating, you should just go and work in an audit firm. And then after 3 years, and then you'll be very successful. That was what I got. I'm like, because that time I just graduated. So I was like, oh, okay. And then I start to realize that what that actually mean, because it's like they just left me hanging at the spend 3 years and then, question mark. So that is the more science approach about, okay, a lot of people done that, and then it is a very binary trajectory and you follow. Like Cheryl, you say, okay, people do this, I follow. Then I start to realize it's more of an art. And when I say it's of an art, right, it's something that only you will know. Because when I did the client role, which is completely different from any experience that I had, I didn't learn about client. I didn't actually start working in the client space. But having the opportunity to go out and represent the bank and speak to a senior person in the client and have that communication. At the same time, I also learned from all these senior leaders in the industry. I knew it that I love it is because it gives me an outside in view to the company. And I think that is super refreshing. And being someone who always enjoys something new and enjoy learning, I thought that was a great platform for me to, expand, and it's like infinite possibilities. So if you find something that you think, wow, there's so much I can do here, and I get very excited, and I think there's opportunity to grow, I think that's where you found your sweet spot.
But could that be misleading? Because like in every new job that you do, you can always feel that feeling, right? Of like, oh, there's so much that I can do in this space, and there's so much opportunity to learn and grow. So I don't know. I feel like there's something missing there that we still need to have to know whether that is really the right job.
Yeah. So what you're sharing is something new will always sound exciting at the beginning. So this one is a little bit like the quality of happiness. So whenever something is new, right, the happiness will be there, but then it will be more momentarily or more short term. But for me, when I know that it's something long term that I want to do, is because I feel that I really can do it for the next 3 to 5 years, not in the same exact form, but in a way that I really think that, being in the client space is where I can, do transformation. I can do, relationship management. I can grow a team of client service, etc. So if you notice, when I found that sweet spot, that's where the rest of my other roles are kind of linked to it, just because I found something that was meaningful for me to grow and I personally resonate with. So it's more about when you find that new job and you might enjoy it for a while, the question to ask yourself is, do you think you can do it for the next 3 to 5 years? If your answer is, I'm not sure, then I think maybe continue to reflect on that. If you say no, then straight away it's like, okay, maybe this is not my cup of tea. But if you say yes and you start to explore around it, there's actually a lot of opportunities that, that may be something that you can do and you find yourself enjoy doing and hopefully not get bored over time.
So what I hear you say in summary is like, find a job that warms the cockles of your heart for the next 3 to 5 years of your life.
I might need to pay James Lim that if I use that.
I'm wondering also whether it's important to look at the worst case scenario, right? Because I think sometimes we can look at a new role with very glittery eyes and say, oh, this is something new, so exciting, but we don't see the hardship that one has to go through. So if I can find myself saying, wow, it's exciting to actually go through challenges, to solve problems, or to not have an answer, or to move out of my comfort level, then that might be my indication which 3 to 5 years I think I can stick in the same role regardless of highs and lows.
I think it goes back to really the courage again, not to move away and because when you just change your job, the last thing that you want to hear is that, okay, this is not the right job, because then you have to go through the entire process of like searching for something else again, going through the interviews, which are not fun. I guess listen to your intuition. If it doesn't feel right, then you should do something about it.
Or sometimes it can also be, even though, and again, just because you found something that warmed the cockles of your heart doesn't mean that every day is a smooth sailing day. There, like what Kai Xing says, sometimes there will be, challenges and difficult conversations. I think a lot of times it's also about, even if you're in a role that, like you said, let's say your day feels and like, wow, no lah, it's not my cup of tea already. My advice would be really also stick through it for some time, because there's always something to learn in that. And I see this with leaders as well. Sometimes, you can't choose your bosses, for example. Then that one you can't just jump. I mean, can lah, but what if you meet another similar person in another organization? So the mantra that I usually use is, if I meet a really good, inspiring leader, I learn from the person. If I meet a leader that, maybe doesn't resonate much with me and, maybe then I can also learn what not to do when I'm a leader. And I think that applies as well when we are in a role that, maybe we are not on the high every day, but there's always something to learn. And I realize sometimes when you're in a very challenging role that is not resonating with you, it is also a very good practice about how you deal with your own aversion. Yeah, because otherwise we might then be jumping from one to another. It's a bit like samsara lah, just in a work context. But Cheryl, you're right. I mean, it then come to a point in time that you think that, you have invested enough time for me to make that decision and have the courage to pivot. I think that's also the right thing to do. But just remember not to react quite immediately, because in any perfect sexy job, there are always days like, oh my gosh, get me out of here kind.
But I think it's important to caveat though that, okay, that is good, but it is very important to take care of your mental health. If the environment is toxic, the people are just backbiting, then shoot out, please.
Yeah. And for me, right, sometimes when I speak to people, sometimes the role can be tough and not what you like. But if the people there are, people that you can work with, it's still not that bad. So the worst combi is, that role is already not what you like, and then the environment is completely toxic. That could be completely unbearable. And then obviously there's where the role and the environment is good, and then that's where you will blossom. But I completely agree with, for me, one of the reasons why I stayed where I am for more than a decade, which a lot of my peers would kind of say wow, you're silly, why you so loyal to the same firm, and then you're kind of young, you should be looking around and hop around. But I've been super grateful to have met pretty amazing people, and I think the people piece, obviously I think that's like a trump card for me. That says a lot about the working environment and where to go and where to stay.
Yeah, I think it's really about finding that balance, right? Because I also do know that there are some practitioners, they will just take every moment as a learning moment. Then they take it upon themselves, right? Even though, the work culture is super toxic, but because they're so compassionate, they say, oh, I can't leave the company because, everyone is struggling and there's something for me to learn. And they don't think for themselves, which I think is quite unhealthy, to the point like Cheryl said, right? If their mental health is being jeopardized, I think it's really a sign that you should just pull the plug and go somewhere else. So I think it's important to have options, but at the same time to not point finger to say, oh, it's somebody else's fault or it's my fault, but to look at both sides.
When is the time to pull the plug? So just right before this podcast, I was reading this CNA article about mental well-being and burnout at work. And as much as we say mental health is pretty invisible, but I strongly believe that when it comes to burnout and stress, actually it comes out even on your physical side. So for example, simple things like if you couldn't sleep well, every night, I don't know, you dream about your colleagues, or you pre-plan while you are in your shower about these meetings will be difficult, etc. Or even things like you're not eating well. So it could be you suddenly just want to snack a lot, or you suddenly just I just don't feel like eating, I've got no appetite because I'm very busy, this next PowerPoint is the most important thing to me. I think those are signs that we really need to have a lookout for. And what's most important is sometimes you don't have to find the solution yourself. When you're at those pivotal moments, I would say always speak to a friend, because a friend or another party will lend you the perspective about, and these are people that you trust the most, know you well, to know that, hey, I actually think that you've been looking pretty stressed and you really need to take a chill pill for a while, and they really stand from the care for you. I think having someone that just keep a lookout for you at that point in time, and then maybe just discuss, for example, with for me, discussing with my hubby, to know that, hey, am I just being complainy because it's my natural habit? Whenever I have this kind of scenario, I would end up lamenting, or am I really at a red zone whereby it's really starting to impact me and my physical well-being signs are showing up? So I think that's where it will give us an indicator of when to pivot, not quit, because I think pivoting with the right intention actually will get us further in the journey rather than stopping the journey.
Do you have any advice, or how do you personally take care of your own mental well-being so that you don't get to the stage of burnout?
I think I would answer this in two ways. One is One is the conventional burnout of you just think you have too much work, so you're overwhelmed. So that's more a quantity thing. The other one is you're burnout because you have constant self-doubt or thinking that you're not good enough and you're the worst human being on earth. So it's more a quality thing. So for me, in terms of the quantity of work, I think this is where the whole planning, open discussion with your manager to make sure that at any point that you think it's too much, to just ask a very simple question to say that which one is the most important, because then that gives you the permission to say that, oh, instead of doing 10 things, actually it's only 3. Then you already cut it by like 1/3. So one of the things that obviously I've learned throughout my career journey, and this could be very ingrained in our Asian culture, right? You only say yes, and you say yes to everything. But I realized that is not sustainable. And I think Kai-Sing, you and I talk about sustainability over the last 2 to 3 years, and that's something that I've used as a reminder to anchor myself that, I don't have to be Wonder Woman or Superwoman to, do everything. But when it comes to quantity, to really plan and have those could be difficult conversations to ask what is the most important. So that I think is the easier bit to do. The harder bit to do is always with ourselves. So as you all would have known, the biggest critic we all have is not other people, it's ourselves. So we are our biggest critic, which is quite an irony. But that happens a lot, and I primarily found this more evident in female as well. And there are research that shows that, when there is a job application, when a man see that they are 60% fitting to the qualifications they will apply, but for a woman, they need to see like they are fitting 100%. So we are sometimes shortchanging ourselves, and the doubt and the perception may actually cause a lot more mental stress and burnout. So what has been very useful for me, and I'm a huge proponent of that, I have constant self-doubt as well. And one of the teacher that I thought was really, really good at this is actually Venerable Thupten Chodron. So in Venerable Thupten's Chodron talk, she always said out loud how our mind thinks. How when we're jealous, how does the mind speak? Or when we are competitive, how does that speak? So her teachings resonate with me since many years ago, mainly because of my nature that I've shared, right? And I was like, that's actually how my mind thinks, but no one actually speak it out loud the first time like that. And whenever I have those moments of afflictions, thank goodness there's Google. I'll typically will Google Venerable Thupten Chodron for that particular topic. And usually she just have a hit for me. So that's how I try to make sure that I have a reminder to make sure that both from a quantity of work perspective and the quality of what I think of myself doesn't cause unnecessary burnout until that I can't actually pull it back. And I am actually reading this book by Venerable Chodron right now. It's called Awaken Every Day. And because sometimes I'm so busy, I can't typically finish a Dharma book if it's a big read. But this is just a verse or a page every day. So I read this every day, and sometimes miraculously, the teachings is what I need at that point in time. And that actually helps me a lot in, be it my self-doubt or self-critic, or when I'm trying to strive to be perfect, to remind myself that I'm still a human being, still learning and growing. So that brings me back to earth, not in Mars anymore.
I thought it was very interesting that you mentioned the psychological aspect of burnout. Because I think every time when we look at burnout, we're always just thinking about, okay, it's peak period. It's common that everyone is burnt out. After that, have a break, go to Bali, etc. So many people struggle with. I've talked to like colleagues and managers and mentors, and they've already they also mentioned the same thing. That feeling of imposter syndrome is like pervasive. Like it doesn't even matter if you're like an associate or like a senior manager. Everyone feels that to a certain extent. It took me a good 2 years to be able to say like, okay, I kind of know what I'm doing here. I kind of feel like I deserve to be at this place. A lot of my 2 years was like comparing with my colleagues who were more experienced, coming from a lot of different companies. And I'll always be like, oh my God, I I just can't do it lah. And it's always taking my worst comparing with people's best. And then obviously it doesn't make sense, but I don't know. I feel like it's very fun to do that to myself. I also don't know why. So I think like some steps that I've taken to kind of elevate that is always talk to people about their experiences, because I think when you are being able to be vulnerable, you realize that, oh, the person that you think got their stuff together actually doesn't, actually feels anxious too, actually feels like, they don't know what they're doing. So when you have that kind of open conversation with people, you realize that, hey, we are all just human beings that are trying our best, doing our best, and want to feel recognized and validated. And I think that changes the perspective also from one of like beating yourself up to like, hey, how can we solve this solution? Is there something that I could learn from someone else? Can I upgrade my skill in a certain sense? Especially during 2020, it was super important to have a proper stop working, like carving out the space mentally and physically to really put a stop there. And I think exercise has been quite helpful for me because it just takes my mind off things.
Yeah. For a more practical level, I think it's about blocking out time to not do anything. Because I don't trust myself if I don't do that. Because I'll just get in the flow, right? Then I'll work till like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. I'm still working. But if I carve out time and routine, then that's really like non-negotiable. So Google Calendar, it's my life savior. I use it to organize my entire life. And based on last year during COVID, so Vasa period, the rains retreat, is a 3-month period, right? So I took on this challenge where I would have to dial in to the evening chanting session every single day, except for weekends, because I, want to spend time with my family. And surprisingly, even though that was like my peak period, but just doing nothing else, but dedicating my time for chanting, for meditation, for a good 2.5 hours every single day, I actually feel revitalized. And then I kind of wonder, in the past, I always think that I don't even have time to sit for half an hour. Like, why do I have time to even block out 2.5 hours? And things just seem to get done, It's not like I have work piling up, and I seem to be doing things a lot more efficiently. So I think on hindsight, it's really not so much about the quantity of time, but the energy that goes into it. And then, maybe for listeners listening to this, just try, 1 hour routine. Don't do anything, just rest and see what happens. And it would be good to do it with a community, so there's accountability as well. I'm wondering whether we can go back to the whole idea of working. What is your thought on this whole hustle culture?
For me, I hustle on things that I'm interested in. So if I'm interested, I will really put effort into it, because I feel like there is a clear outcome of like mastering a skill or mastering something that I'm interested in. And then the progress becomes very enjoyable, because it's a progress that I get to define by myself. But let's say if it's things that are not that interesting, then I think I struggle very much to do it. And it will, then, I can be described as like lazy or like whatever, because I just feel like my mental state is not aligned to it, and I don't want to, like, it will take a lot of willpower for me to force myself to do it. So I think hustling works if you are able to convince yourself that it's something that is worth doing. And I think a lot of this conversation, it seems to put like growth, career success as the base assumption, right? That is what you want to hustle for and you should be hustling for. But I think we should also not discount that there are different things that people could hustle for, like in their own way. And I think I was listening to the recording that you had with Brother Tan also, and I really love the example that he shared. Like Siddhartha was a super hustler before he became Buddha. He had to go through all the most intense meditation teachings and try all the different ways. So that is considered hustling. So don't think that there's only one bar of what hustling should look like, and do the one that I think you enjoy. At the same time, I think as with everything, like balance is key. I don't really like the word hustle because it does have the connotation of over-exerting of effort. I feel that you need to be smart about things in the sense that put in the right efforts that give you your result, but not do everything the most difficult way to get the same results.
Have to be strategic lah. Yeah, because I know sometimes people like, oh, the more number of hours I OT, I can win a medal or a badge. Sometimes we compete with people based on who sleeps the latest and who stays in the office the longest. I'm not so sure whether you guys have those colleagues or times before. Like I was guilty of that. Just like, wow, I worked till so late. And I feel proud of myself, and I think it's very blind, like you mentioned. It wasn't strategic at all.
I guess there's no right or wrong, whether should we hustle or should we not. A lot of it also driven by the character and personality. And most recently, I've also noticed that besides driven by character and personality, it was driven by social media. Social media in the sense that, wow, everyone hustle, I so better hustle. If not, I'll be the one that's left out. And I think it was also aggravated with the whole FIRE mentality, which is financial independence, retire early. And I've seen a number of the younger generation now getting very anxious and worried about, hey, I feel very FOMO, fear of missing out. So I think we just need to be mindful in terms of why we hustle. I think a lot of people just follow without understanding why are they even doing it in the first place. I think I have two very interesting nuggets to share. So one was, instead of FOMO, the recent term I learned was JOMO, which is joy of missing out. Sometimes, if you are the one that actually don't have to hustle so much and then you get to really relax and do what you enjoy doing, that in itself is brings you a lot of peace and contentment. Again, like what you say, Kai-Sing, earlier, it's a matter of choice. Which choice do you actually enforce? And secondly, I've also read an article this week, and there is actually another way to achieve FIRE. So a lot of us think hustle is the only way to achieve FIRE. Actually, frugality also allows you to achieve FIRE. There's always different ways to achieve the mathematical equation. It's a matter of, which part do you exercise more, and whichever choice anyone choose to, and we are all adults, I just feel that, we shouldn't judge which is the right one or which is the wrong one, and everyone has its own. But most importantly, coming back to mental health, right, is no matter what choice you exercise, the most importantly at the end of the day is you do not compare. And I think Cheryl said it before, comparison is the thief of joy. And I think sometimes that kind of make you even more lost as you follow and you forgot hey, why am I doing this in the first place? And then why this person have a condo and Mercedes and then I hustle so much and I still don't have a car. So it is kind of endless if we compare. And I think it's important to ask ourselves why, and there are always different ways to achieve the same outcome.
I would disagree about comparison. I feel like it depends on whether we are comparing from a place of sufficiency or a place of deficiency. Because if we don't compare, then we don't know how to improve, right? And also, it's very hopeful because I can compare this year with last year. Where am I in terms of mental well-being? And then if I don't do that comparison, I wouldn't know whether I'm for better or for worse and what are some of the action steps. So if I'm comparing from a place of sufficiency and to just, be inspired to improve, then I think it's actually very wholesome. But if it's more like, there's a sense of lag and, FOMO rather than JOMO, then I think that's where a lot of problem can surface. So I really think it's the intention and I think the sense of ego and that self also.
Yeah, so I remembered one of my university lecturers shared a Zen story with me on this before. I think maybe it's really hard, like you said, to not compare at all. But I think depending on, what is the outcome of the comparison and how does it make you feel, is where we need to be mindful of. So the Zen story was actually a story of two trees. And let's say one is an apple tree and the other one is an orange tree. And obviously we know apple and orange tree, let's say they breed differently at different point in time. But if we tend to compare them as the same tree and then say, how come this tree has the fruits and then this tree haven't have the fruits yet? I think that's where it will cause more suffering. However, if you are comparing in terms of, am I a better person today versus I was yesterday, I think that then also gives you more gratitude and peace versus always trying to define your self-worth outside of yourself. But yeah, I think it's quite inevitable that we will tend to compare, but it's more about, like you said, what's your intention of comparing? What's the outcome of your comparison? And generically speaking, now with the bomb of social media, the comparison are a lot more the latter that you said, which I think is not healthy for a lot of people. And sometimes people may not even realize it because it's just so ingrained as they comb through and scroll down and, and how they feel after. So then the whole awareness and the mindfulness may not be there for them to actually digest that whole comparison thing.
One of our subscribers actually asked, how can Buddhism help one to overcome procrastination? And I think in society, procrastination has a very negative connotation. I procrastinate means I'm not doing anything or like I'm delaying the things that I'm supposed to do. But do you think that there could be a connection between what you've just mentioned, Cheryl, which is, do you even find the motivation and the intention to do what you like? Have you procrastinated before? Because I think people have a very warped mentality. Oh, overachiever, don't procrastinate at all. They have no downtime, which is completely not true, right? Yeah, so do you feel like people procrastinate because they don't find meaning and motivation in what they do? And is it wrong to procrastinate?
I don't think it's wrong to procrastinate. I think because if you dig a little bit deeper, why people procrastinate, I think yes, one part is like the lack of motivation. It just doesn't align with what they're interested in, and things become very effortful. And as human beings, our brains are evolved to take the path of least resistance. That's how we evolve and survive until 2022. But I think the second part is the emotional and psychological part of procrastination, of maybe you're feeling overwhelmed, you're not feeling good enough. That's why, you then just want to reject or resist the idea of getting started because you have that perhaps narrative in your mind that I won't be able to finish this or I won't be able to do this well. So why bother? I think the problem with procrastination is if we tie that to the person's personality, then that becomes something that you can't change. But if you tie it to a little bit more about the situation, then that is something you can change. So in the sense that if you have a huge project, how can you make it more doable by breaking it into smaller like tasks? Then it becomes psychologically more acceptable for you to then feel motivated to want to get started. So, there's this, like in 2020, I think everyone was talking about that whole KonMari thing, right? Where, feel joy and stuff like that. But then, so what happened now in 2022 is that the whole craze kind of faded away. And the reason for that was because the concept of KonMari is that you need to take out everything in your cupboard. You need to take out your whole garage. So a lot of people stop at that first step because, the thought of just like clearing your whole house is crazy. Then Fumio Sasaki, which is a Japanese guy also that kind of works on this organizing concept, came out with something that changed the whole thing. He was just like, just do one thing, just clear one thing, like just put a plate aside and then do the second thing, do the third thing, right? Clear your fork and spoons next. And that was very appealing to everybody because everyone feels like, oh, I could do something, I can achieve something, and you build up that self-confidence and it leads you to do greater stuff slowly. Yeah.
For me, I think we need to start to also understand why we procrastinate. So sometimes if you observe enough times when you procrastinate, you might see a pattern in terms of what are the things that you typically procrastinate with. So I can resonate with what Cheryl just said, because sometimes you might be procrastinating. It could be a moral reason why actually I don't want to do this, but I don't know how to tell the person no. And it could also be I'm fearful or I'm doubtful because I don't know if I do this whether I'll fail or not. So I think there is a deeper question to ask rather than just staying at the procrastination level, which is to say, why am I procrastinating? Do you all know what's the opposite of procrastination?
Productivity?
That was very funny. I didn't even know this word exists, but there's something called precrastination.
What?
Yeah, so procrastination sounds like we are delaying something, but it could be our affliction why we are delaying something. But there's also precrastination, which is, and sometimes I'm guilty of that, is because I want to be so efficient, I do it fast, right? So I just make sure I do it, and then just get it. And then especially for overachievers, sometimes like, wow, sure, I'll do everything and finish. So I think there is always both sides of the coins. Okay, sometimes we procrastinate and sometimes we procrastinate. For those of us who procrastinate more, is to also come back to the why. Why are you doing this thing in the first place? What's the meaning that you're trying to bring, rather than just jumping to doing it? For those of us who are more prone to procrastination, then to also understand why are we feeling, this is not the right thing to do, or, we're feeling a bit sluggish and we don't want to do that at that point in time. So I think asking why instead of just, hanging at that emotion level and feel bad about it, change to a more action-oriented outcome.
Sorry, I had a question. I don't really understand precrastination. It's my first time hearing it. Can you explain more?
So procrastination is you have something to do and then you kind of delay it. Procrastination is you have something to do and then you just do it quickly to just get it over the line.
Okay, but that means you are, it's the same as being productive, like if you just get your stuff done, right?
But the procrastination is more like you just anyhow just get it done.
I think the difference is when we procrastinate and get things done fast, it doesn't matter whether that task is important or not. We just want to get things checked off our list. And I'm not sure whether you're guilty of this, but I am, where I finish a task and I do it very quickly. Then I check, my to-do list, I forget to put in. Then I would put it in just so I can check the box, even though I've done the task already. And productivity, I think it's effective. Being effective. Some people might misunderstand productivity as being very outcome driven, like it depends on the number of output, right? But it's actually not the case. And I think tying back to Buddhism also, overcoming procrastination or precrastination, it's a lot about understanding our likings and dislikings, because it's like, oh, this is uncomfortable, I am afraid of failure, I don't like it, so I deny it. Or I really like the feeling of affirmation or feeling that I'm achieving something, that I do a lot and it's not very sustainable. So can we do something where there isn't a very strong sense of stimulus, but we just do it with the flow and feel fulfilled? I think it's about understanding likings and dislikes and how can we stop swinging from these two ends of the spectrum and just do because we find it fulfilling.
I think we spend so much time at work, right? Although the official one is 40 hours, but obviously most people spend more than 40 hours at work. And our work achievements are very much tied to our ego, right? Our sense of self. Like if you don't do well at a presentation, you can take it extremely personally that I suck as a human being. So are there any tips that you have to, just by extension, like to kind of dissociate that sense of self or ego with the work that you do?
I think that is completely natural, and we shouldn't go into self-blame mode. Simple maths that you just did. If I spent, more than a quarter of my time of my day at work, or even I'm not at work, if I'm thinking, I would actually consider, although HR wouldn't think I'm working, but I'm still thinking. So it's natural. Then we start to associate it with our self-identity, and I think that's when. I think over COVID, with a lot of people that, have to lose their job because of the economy, I think that's when it kind of struck like, oh, what is my self-worth? What is my self-value, etc. In fact, I did kind of play back to myself while it didn't happen to me and while I'm grateful I still have a job. I'm like, oh my gosh, like one day if that ever happened to me, like would I completely lose my self-worth? So coming back to the first point that we were discussing, which is why I've always wanted to make sure that I have the balancing factor outside of work, because my self-worth is not purely defined by work. While the workspace have given me the opportunity to help others and help myself, can I actually also do the same outside of work, which Obviously, I've proven that it's possible, and hence I took a lot of the corporate concept into the Buddhist community, be it the mentoring program or International Women's Day, what have you. So I think it's natural that we'll associate ourselves with that, but it's also important to find the joy and meaning outside of work, so that you become a more holistic human being, and it's not just one aspect of your life.
I actually find just now the way, Cheryl, you asked the question at the very beginning, it's a very helpful way to dissociate ourselves from our work. I mean, I'm not so sure whether you realize, typically when you introduce yourself to a new person, it's like, oh, I'm Kai-Sin and I work as, or this, like, I mean, seldom people talk about hobbies unless it's like a, orientation. And it just goes to show how much intertwined our identity is with work. So what if we could make it a habit to introduce ourselves with something more purposeful, like a broader term? Hi, I'm Amy and I'm a joy lamb, or people consider me as a joy lamb. Then no matter where you go, that value and that personality and character would shine, and you would kind of still thrive wherever you are.
I'll do a test right now. So Kai-Sin, can you please introduce yourself?
Oh no. Well, it's so difficult. I mean, we still need the conventions. I would personally say, hi, I am figuring out life and perpetually curious. Life goal is to understand how the mind works. Cheryl, your turn.
It's not like the arrow.
Hi, I'm Cheryl, and I think I'm too polarizing to be fit into like a description, because I just find myself a bundle of this but that. So yeah, no answer, but that's the answer.
Work for all of us to crystallize what that means.
Yeah, and I think it's also a very beautiful thing to say that may change. I may tell you Joylam now, and then 10 years down the road you ask me, it could be something else. And it's ever changing and it's evolving, and that also showcase growth. But I think it's a good reminder to just remind ourselves that we are more than just, tying to work or certain labels or certain conventions.
Great. So it's been such an insightful conversation. I'm just wondering if we can end off with one action step that our listeners can take away. What would that be, Sister Amy?
So since this was about overachieving and contentment, I think one action that I would encourage all the subscribers to do is just be very kind to yourself.
And why is that important, and how can they start to be kind? Like, where do they start?
So I mentioned that I learned accountancy, although I'm not a practicing accountant. One of the talk that I was in yesterday resonated with me and kind of like cha-ching my accountancy DNA again. So Venerable Fashin was sharing with me that every night before we go to bed, remember to close our accounts properly. Meaning that, end the day with, gratitude, no matter how hard the day has been, whether, it's been difficult working with people or you have been difficult on yourself, be it the self-critic or doubt, there's always something to be grateful for. And to end the day on such positive account and looking at things more as a glass half full rather than empty, I think it's important. Sometimes I think we are being too hard on ourselves, and I think we need to be like the best friend to ourselves to start first if we want to make this joy a lot more sustainable. So I think be kind, and the way to be kind is really close your account every night on a positive, grateful note.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing so much with us so openly as well. I think my biggest takeaway would be to pause and understand why we're doing the things that we're doing, and to be able to, in a way, acknowledge that this is a long-term thing, not like look at things in a very short-term lens, and celebrate all progress and big and small achievements on the way.
Yes, that's a very beautiful summary.
Thank you so much, Sister Amy, for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the episode, and I hope you have enjoyed it as much as we did. It will be really helpful if you click the subscribe button on Spotify and YouTube and do some social media magic. Share, comment, tag a friend. We have exciting topics lined up, so that's gonna get juicy. You can get more information on our Telegram group, Handful of Bliss, and you can join the discussion with the Telegram community. Do share with us your main takeaway from this episode, and I look forward to hearing from you.